how to slash implementation time and cost, big tech versus the EU, and how to cut through the ERP AI hype. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 230 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 230. This is the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, the tech-agnostic view of the people, process, technology, and strategy aspects of transformation. Thank you for being here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys, including strategy, software selection, implementation planning, and the actual execution of implementation as well. So if you'd like to learn more about us, be sure to check out thirdstage-consulting.com. Joining me, as always, is our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited for this AI-focused episode.
Yes, we are going to cover a lot of stuff related to AI. We don't want to go too heavy on the AI hype, but we are going to cut through some of the hype in the conversation today and talk about real use cases of how AI is actually being used in helping implementations speed up, but as well as how AI is being used in the world of ERP. So those are just a couple of things we'll talk about. But more specifically, we'll start off today's segment with our opening segment talking about some questions we've received on social media. We've also got some newsworthy topics we'll get into, one being big tech versus the EU and what's going on there. We'll also talk about how or if CIOs are falling out of love with public cloud. So we'll get into that later today. And then I'll also have our first guest on the show will be Khalid Morris. He's the director of AI and data strategy here at Third Stage Consulting. He's going to be on the show talking about how to slash implementation time and cost, not only with AI, but we'll talk about just in general, how to speed up your implementation and how to save time and money and how to be more effective using AI, but also some of the other tactics and strategies that we've seen work really well with our clients. So those are just some of the things we'll cover with Khalid. And then later in the show, we'll talk about how to cut through the ERP AI hype. You know, what's real in the world of ERP in terms of AI and what's still just a pipe dream. So we're going to get into all that and more in today's conversation. Very heavy focus on AI, but hopefully we'll give you some tangible uses of AI here today. But before we dive into our guests and other topics, what are some of the social media questions we have here today, Darian?
Yeah, some good questions today on social media. This first one is, given that employee panic regarding AI stems from neglecting organizational job design, causing them to feel threatened and less valuable, how can companies proactively rethink and redesign job roles to empower employees with AI, preventing fear and leveraging technology for true transformation?
It's a great question. And I think the first key is to remove the uncertainty and doubt and lack of clarity that goes with what someone's job is going to look like, especially when you're talking about such a potentially game-changing and disruptive technology like AI. AI is something that's just different than other technologies in terms of the mass effect it can have on people's jobs and their effectiveness and efficiency. But having said that, even though there is a huge upside potential, it's equally disruptive in a negative way too, in terms of how employees are responding to AI. So I think the big thing is just to clarify for people and not even for the people affected, just as importantly as a leadership team, defining what people's jobs are going to look like in this post-AI world. And once they have AI tools, what will their job look like? What will they do with that extra time they have? What will they do to replace all the heroics and tribal knowledge that they've become so dependent on in terms of their perceived value to the organization? So that's what you have to look at it, is from that angle of how do we settle people down and give them clarity of what their job descriptions are going to be, what the job roles are going to be, and ultimately giving them that clarity in most cases, I think, is going to create a positive impact on resistance to change, because people usually don't resist change because they're bad people or because they just want to be difficult or they want to sabotage the project. You occasionally have that, but that's not very common, actually. The more common and more difficult resistance to change is the good intentioned resistance to change. People want to do well, but then once you introduce risk and doubt and lack of clarity as it relates to their job, they are going to start pushing back because they sort of move down in Maslow's hierarchy of needs from, actualization, self-actualization of how to make the company better. Now suddenly they're in survival mode. They move back to the base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, to where now they are more worried about their own job security, their own perceived value to the organization. And you've sort of forced them down Maslow's hierarchy of needs back to that basic level of just basic survival within the organization versus where you want them, which is back up at the self-actualization phase. So the best way to get them back up to the self-actualization phase is to say, let's provide that clarity and help them understand that their job isn't going away necessarily, assuming that's true. Their job isn't going away. They're going to be better at their jobs. They're going to be able to do more meaningful work. And more specifically, what does that mean? You just have to be clear and specific about how their jobs are going to change. And usually that will calm people down for the better.
Yeah, our next question today is Palantir AIP the dark secret that lets businesses avoid the pain of upgrading or switching ERP systems by adapting to even the oldest legacy and mainframe systems?
Yeah, and I saw that question on social media. They said AIP. I think they meant API, but I'm not 100% sure. But I'll talk about Palantir just in general then, because yes, Palantir is a way that you can integrate legacy systems without necessarily having to replace them, and that's the dark secret that the industry doesn't necessarily want you to know in the ERP space. And we'll talk about that actually in the last segment of today's show when we talk about cutting through the ERP AI hype. One of the things we'll talk about is this fact in more detail, which is, ERP vendors would have you believe that the only way to take advantage of AI, at least their AI tools within their packages, are going to be to upgrade to the newest version of the software. For some of you, that's going to make a lot of sense, but for some of you, that's not going to make sense for whatever reason. Maybe you don't have the budget, the resources, the focus right now. Maybe there's no ROI or business case for it. In which case, rather than say, well, I guess we'll go ahead and spend all this needless money on a new ERP system just to get to AI, why not just leverage tools that you can use now with your legacy systems and data using AI? And Palantir has made its living, or it has disrupted the market in many cases by providing that option. And it's not just Palantir, by the way. We're not affiliated with Palantir. We're not affiliated with any software vendors. But Palantir is one example. Snowflake, Databricks, those are a couple other examples of companies that have really found this unique niche in the market that I think is going to be a really big niche in the next 3 to 5 years, especially, which is, hey, let's not necessarily, these are going to be companies that would be saying, let's not necessarily rip out our back office ERP system just to get the full advantage of AI. Let's leverage what we already have. Maybe our systems are working fine. They may not be perfect, but maybe they're working good enough right now. So let's layer on top of Palantir or Snowflake or some other tool that allows us to get some better workflows, some better AI tools, and better integration of data across platforms without having to rip everything out. And I think that's the beauty of AI now, is now all of a sudden the balance of power, the center of gravity, is moving away from the core back office ERP systems. And I think it's moving toward AI. And I think eventually AI will become the new center of gravity for enterprise technology, and everything else sort of revolves around that versus everything revolving around ERP systems as they had in the past. So that's where I think we're headed. And so I think companies that can't justify replacing ERP should be looking at lower cost options to leverage what they've already got, especially if your data is clean and you've got decent data, you've got decent legacy systems. You may not be on the latest and greatest, but that's okay. You don't need to be. That's not your business. You don't need to be on the bleeding edge of technology necessarily. So I think that's the way I would look at it.
Yeah, super interesting for sure. And this kind of leads us into our first newsworthy article of the day, which is kind of big tech versus the EU, and it's the battle over AI regulation. So the title, or one of the comments I thought was kind of funny in the article was there's drama brewing in the Brussels. And it said Apple, Google, and Meta are officially pushing back hard against the EU's new AI Act. And why? Because they say the current rules could make it even harder for Europe to compete in the global AI race. According to the report from CIO, the companies are lobbying the European Commission to delay or reconsider parts of the legislation. They argue that the definitions are too vague, the compliance burdens are too heavy, and the obligations could stifle innovation, especially when it comes to foundational models like GPT, Gemini, and Llama, I think is the other one. Meta, in particular, is concerned about how the AI Act regulates open source models. They say it could kill off collaboration and slow the entire ecosystem. On the flip side, EU regulators are trying to prioritize safety, transparency, and human oversight. Their concern is that without strict guardrails, AI could reinforce bias, harm consumers, and concentrate power even further in big tech hands. Now that we've got this kind of standoff, regulation versus innovation, and the rest of the world is kind of watching now to see who's going to win this. Eric, what is your take on the EU AI Act? Do you think this is the kind of regulation the world needs right now, or are you kind of on the side of this is maybe not what AI needs and what the world needs?
That's a good question, and a dilemma for sure that I'm a bit on the fence on. I mean, generally speaking, I'm not a fan of government regulation. I'm more of a libertarian than anything in terms of American politics and believing in less government being better. That's just my personal opinion. And even though the show isn't about politics, it informs my opinions a bit. But in this case, I mean, I think on the one hand, I think it's true in what Meta and the big tech guys are saying is that you will stifle innovation to some degree if you regulate it. It's just a fact. I mean, I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing though, because the innovation is happening so fast anyway that I don't know if you slow it down a little bit. I don't know that that's gonna, we can't keep up with AI as it is. As in my opinion, I think the industry and society is having trouble keeping up with it as it is. The court system is for sure having trouble keeping up with it. I have no idea how they're going to sort this out over the next 10 or 20 years. It's probably going to take to sort out all the intellectual property, data privacy issues that are bound to happen, that are already happening, copyright issues, all kinds of stuff. So there's already enough change. There's already enough disruption. Yeah, I don't believe in a lot of government regulation, but I see why the EU would do it, especially because the EU is, they're all about data privacy and protecting people's consumer data, especially. So, if you're talking about, me being able to now access any personal information about you or whoever that's ever been put out there about a corporation or about a business, is that right or wrong? Should it be regulated? I could see the argument for it for sure. I honestly don't know what the right answer is. I don't have a good, solid, strong opinion. I think you will have to regulate at some point because there just will be a dark side to AI. And I think we may already be starting to see it with a lot of the layoffs in the tech space, especially companies that are laying people off largely because of AI. I mean, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg now with a lot of high paying development jobs, developer type jobs that are getting automated and eliminated. Once it starts working its way down the socioeconomic chain and you start seeing lower income people that are potentially negatively affected by AI, I think that's where governments throughout the world, including EU, the US, definitely the Western types of governments are going to probably come in with a heavy hand and try and fix that socioeconomic problem that creates. So I think it's just too hard to say. We don't know where it's going to go. So I couldn't tell you if it's right or wrong. It's just a matter of, can the government really fix it and solve it, or are they just going to make it worse? I guess that'd be the question for the audience. I'd love to hear the audience questions on this, or the audience responses on this, because I don't have a strong opinion, but I'm sure many of you do. So I'd love to hear the audience's feedback here too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Eric, what do you think in the article? One thing I was wondering is Meta claimed that this could kill open source AI in Europe. What do they mean by that? Can you maybe elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's having these open AI models where we can all feed it data. It'll go get data wherever it needs to. and really treating data and information as somewhat of a commodity, a commoditized thing that's not, I don't want to say it's not valuable, but now it's just, there's just more of it, there's more access to it, and now these AI tools can make better use of that data and information. So I think the open AI model is so dependent on mass volumes of data to train it, first of all, to be more effective. So if you cut that off and you limit what it can or can't have, then you aren't teaching as well as you could. Now, on the flip side, you mentioned the comment, you made a comment about the article talking about biases, human bias in the AI tools. We already see one example of where a court has found that big tech that's using AI models has created some sort of bias. I think it was Workday, if I remember correctly. Workday was found. It was found by a court that Workday, the tool, is creating bias in the hiring practices. In the applicant tracking, the applicant review process. And I think it was alluding to, and again, don't quote me on this, I don't have the article in front of me. I think it was alluding to discrimination. It was discriminating against certain types of people, not intentionally, I don't think, but there was something with the AI and the way it was trained that it had biases. So both those things are a stark reminder that you still have to have human intelligence to guide and direct AI. But on the other hand, if you limit it too much, you're not going to train the AI good enough, as it needs to be. I do wonder, like with ChatGPT and OpenAI, the companies ChatGPT and OpenAI, I think that I do wonder, because they're so dependent on all the information out on the internet, which a lot of that is opinionated and biased in some way because humans created it. I don't know how AI is being trained to cut through the bias, and I don't know if it is. I'm sure there's people on it, data scientist type people that are working on that or have solutions for it, but I just don't know how effective it is yet. So I think those are all things that we just have to be aware of. And I think we just have to understand we don't know where this AI thing is going to take us. And we just need to be able to be ready for any direction it might go.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of talking about the future there, to expand on that, do you see a future where global companies would have to customize AI deployments for each region due to different regulatory frameworks? Or do you think that eventually everybody will try to have something that's similar?
It's a good question. Or maybe, to add that too, like not even just local regulations, but local cultures. Do you train the AI model differently in different parts of the world? If it's, different religious or political, cultural beliefs, whatever it is, that I don't know. I think when you start doing that, you limit the effectiveness of it, because now you're scaling back its access to information. So that would be a downside. But on the flip side, one size doesn't fit all. So it's not going to be as relevant if it's a truly global, unbiased sort of thing. So I don't know. These are great questions that I honestly have not thought about, but until now.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, super interesting. But I want to switch gears here and get into our next newsworthy article of the day, and another topic about AI, just a little bit different now. This one, the title was "Are CIOs Falling Out of Love with Public Cloud?" And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because we've talked about cloud a lot on here, but this article was saying there's been a big shift in cloud lately, and that for the last decade, public cloud was the holy grail. You weren't innovative, in quotes, unless you were going all in on AWS or Google Cloud. But fast forward to 2025 and things are getting a little bit more complicated. So according to the CIO, CIOs are rethinking their public cloud strategies, especially as their AI roadmaps get more real. So what's happening is two things. One, AI models are expensive and data hungry, and running them on public cloud platforms can rack up these massive bills for companies. And two, data security and control are becoming top priorities, especially with sensitive customer, financial, or healthcare data being used to train the LLMs. Instead of defaulting to public cloud, CIOs are now leaning into hybrid and multi-cloud strategies, and even repatriating workloads back to private environments. Plus, some are realizing cloud alone isn't a strategy. It's just a tool, and without alignment to real business outcomes, it's just another cost center. Eric, I want to get kind of your take on this whole thing overall. I know you're a big advocate of not forcing people to the cloud. So just what overall is your opinion on this article?
I do agree that public cloud is the holy grail, and it's an amazing thing for software vendors and investors of the software vendors, because they're the only ones that truly gain and have nothing to lose by everyone potentially moving to the cloud or to the public cloud. That's why a lot of vendors like SAP and others are saying, hey, we've got all these great capabilities we've built, but you've got to be in the public cloud to take advantage of it. They really, really want you to move to public cloud. In fact, I know of multiple CIOs and executives at some of these software vendors. I can't name them by name for confidentiality, just respect reasons here. But I know several CEOs and leaders within these software vendors that are comped extremely heavily on their ability to guide the organization to convert as many customers to the cloud as possible. In fact, their investors are just giving them these huge bonuses based on the metrics they hit on the conversion to the cloud, because the investors know how valuable it is, how much it drives up the stock price, and how profitable those vendors become when a company moves to the cloud. So that's why the entire industry is completely singing in unison around how great the cloud is. Everyone needs to move to the cloud. They're commissioning Gartner to put out reports about how great the cloud is, Forrester, all the industry analysts, media, the media even talks about it, about how great the cloud is. So we're all singing in this echo chamber, drinking the Kool-Aid. But then the CIOs are over here saying, wait a minute, I hear this echo chamber. I'm part of this echo chamber, but I'm not finding the business value over here. And I think CIOs and executives are starting to realize that. I also think that the vendor lock that public cloud creates is a real risk that I don't think people talk nearly enough about or think nearly enough about it. It's a material risk, I would say. If I were an investor, I would want to see in a annual report, in annual reports, publicly traded companies put out these annual reports and they talk about what the material risks to the business are. I'm still waiting for someone to come out with a annual report that says, yes, we have a material risk, and it's called vendor lock. We have all of our data, all of our applications in this public cloud environment owned by one vendor. And if that one vendor decides to jack up the price or to cut off our access, or God forbid, we don't pay our bill on our subscription because we run into financial turmoil or whatever, and they have the power to cut it off. I mean, that should be something that every CFO should be terrified of. And so I think from a pure risk mitigation perspective, I think public cloud is a bad idea. I think on-prem, actually, I get crucified for saying this in this industry because it's so backward. People think it's backwards looking, but there is something to be said for on-prem where you have complete control and no one can stop you from doing what you want to do as a business. Whereas now you're putting all your eggs in one basket of someone else's priorities and someone else's pricing model and someone else's whims of what they're going to decide to do in the future. So I think public cloud I think the pendulum will probably swing back away from public cloud. I don't think we're going back to on-prem completely, but I think sort of a hybrid combination of some on-prem, maybe some private cloud, maybe some public cloud. I think that diversification is going to be the key to the future.
Yeah. And how does the AI model play into this? Can companies still have an AI model if they aren't on public cloud? And what does that look like for companies?
Well, this is where it gets tricky because, again, I'll bring up SAP. I picked on SAP a minute ago, but now I'll give kudos to SAP because one thing they've done and one advantage they have is they've gotten tens of thousands of their customers who are on public cloud. They've gotten tens of thousands of them to opt into training their AI models and helping make the AI models better. So that it's not even just the number of companies in organizations that are opting in. It's all the transactions and the volumes of users that go along with that. So these are some of the world's biggest companies now saying, hey, SAP, yes, you can use our data to help train your AI models. And that's a real advantage. If you compare SAP to like a smaller niche player, they just aren't going to have that same, training ability for their AI models. So I think there is advantages there. I think it is easier to leverage AI in a cloud environment just because you've got all your data in one place. And like I said, you can it's easier to train an AI model across, different users within a public cloud environment versus private cloud or on-prem. it can be done, but it's just, I see why vendors want you to be in the public cloud to take advantage of it. So I think there are some advantages from a pure AI perspective. But again, back to the earlier point we were talking about in this episode, and we'll talk about it again later in the last segment, you don't need your ERP vendor to go down the AI path. They'll have you believe that, but you absolutely don't need them. You have other options out there. You have other AI tools that you can be leveraging to take advantage of the systems you have, whether or not it's from your same ERP vendor or not. It's not completely irrelevant, but you have options. You have more options than you realize.
For sure. And one last question, especially as these hyperscalers start to build more AI specific infrastructure for their business, what else can they do? I know you mentioned this like hybrid, maybe a little bit of public, maybe a little bit of private, a little bit of on-prem. What does that look like when they are scaling this AI specific infrastructure? And how much should be on the public side versus the private? It'll depend on the business, but if you can give some insight.
Yeah. I mean, I think from a economies of scale perspective and a cost effectiveness and profitability perspective from the vendor side, absolutely. You want everyone in the public cloud. It's just easier to build that infrastructure to support one solution, which is public cloud. And I think that's where the big vendors are struggling right now is they've got public cloud, they've got private cloud, and then they still have on-prem, and they're trying to support these different systems, and it spreads their R&D dollars thin. It spreads the innovation thin. So I think it could lead to more innovation if you just get everyone to settle on one platform and you're all, there, and they can put all their money in that one basket. And obviously, like I said before, they want it to be public cloud because that's more profitable for them, and the investors like it better. So I don't know. I think that's a case for public cloud right there, is that the innovation probably is greater. The vendors will have more profit and more R&D dollars to invest in innovation if everyone were just to move to the cloud. But again, do we want to do that just to help out the big guys because, we don't want them to have to work too hard to create, AI capabilities across multiple platforms? I don't think that's really our problem or, the average buyer's problem. And again, back to the earlier point, I think there's plenty of innovation to go around right now. Most companies can't keep up or come close to keeping up with the level of innovation right now. So if we speed up innovation even more, honestly, it doesn't help most organizations because they're so far behind and they're still trying to catch up to where things were 10 years ago. So by speeding up and getting, being light years ahead of everyone else, again, it helps the vendors maybe, but it doesn't really help the average company, the average mom and pop retailer or chain, or the average mom and pop manufacturer, mid-sized company. They've got bigger fish to fry and other things to do. They don't need to be worrying about the latest and greatest cutting edge technology necessarily.
Yeah, that's a great point for sure. But I'm excited to kind of switch gears here and get more into AI with the guest today.
Yeah, we're going to get into AI. We'll get into change management, program management, managing your vendors, building out the internal team. We'll talk about all the things you need to do to speed up your implementation and save time and money on the implementation and ultimately make it more effective. And AI is a big part of that. We'll talk quite a bit about how AI is speeding things up for our clients and some of the things we're seeing in the industry. But we'll also talk about other strategies and tactics to speed up your implementation even outside of AI. So we'll get into that with Khalid Morris here in just a moment. And then later in the show, we'll talk about how to cut through the ERP AI hype. What's real, what's fiction, and what do you need to know about AI and ERP and how the two come together. So lots more to cover. We will take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I don't mind letting you down easy, but just give it time. If it don't hurt now, but just wait.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you'll want to download the Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how you can take your transformation to the third stage of success.
I want to invite you to join me and other thought leaders in the digital transformation space to Stratosphere 2025. It's an annual conference we've hosted now for 7 years in a row. It's a great event. It's live in Denver, Colorado, but we're also offering it virtually via hybrid tickets. And And we're going to have a lot of different speakers here, including myself as a keynote, as well as others that you may know from the industry. And this is a perfect conference if you're interested in any sort of digital transformation, including ERP and CRM and HCM. And actually, the theme for this year's session is AI and how AI is affecting all different types of digital transformation. But in addition to AI, we'll also talk about the fundamentals of digital transformation, including program management, evaluating the right software, digital strategy, change management, process improvement, all the things you need to know to make your project successful. It's also a great way to network and learn from others. So just being part of a community that is also like-minded and going through the same things you are, that's another value. And you can join, like I said, remotely in person, and you can also buy VIP tickets if you'd like more exclusive access to me and others from the Third Stage team and other speakers that are going to be there. So I hope to see you soon. Check out my discount code below for discounted tickets. You can go to stratosphere2025.com for more information, including the full agenda, and I hope to see you there. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 230. This is the tech-agnostic, independent view of digital transformation, including people, process, technology, and strategy. Everything you need to know to make your digital transformation more successful. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And excited for our guest here today. We're going to talk about how to save implementation time and cost. And before I jump into the conversation here and introduce our guest, I have a question for the audience that I'd love to see you respond to in the chat, if you don't mind. And that is, what do you think the number one reason is for project delays, project overruns, and ultimately lack of ROI on the implementations? I'd love to sort of just get your knee-jerk reaction, because we're going to unpack it in a lot more detail here with our guest. So be sure to drop that in the chat, and I'll introduce our guest here in the meantime. But we want to talk to Khalid Morris here today. He's from Third Stage Consulting Group. He's a director of AI and data strategy. And he's done a lot of not only AI and data strategy type of work with our clients, but he also does a lot of implementation planning and overall digital strategy, PMO, all the stuff that goes into successful implementations. So we wanted to have Khalid on today to talk about all the things that you could do, which are they're not very expensive. They're not complicated things. These are pretty simple things you can do. It's just how you think about your projects that needs to change, or that can use some improvement in many cases. So we're going to talk to him about all the little things that become big things that you can do to speed up your implementation project plan. It also saves you money longer term. So with that all being said, Khalid, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Just had you on a few weeks ago. It feels like yesterday, but it's been almost 6 weeks or so since you were last on the show. And last time you were here, we talked a lot about AI and how AI can be used as part of an overall digital strategy. And we will touch on AI today. In fact, that is one of the keys, or one of the things that can help with streamlining a project and making it more cost effective and more optimized in general. But before we dive into some of the things we're going to talk about here today, not limited to AI, but other stuff, tell us a little bit about your role and how it pertains to AI and consulting in general.
Well, I'm at Third Stage. I'm the director of AI and data strategy. So I deal with it a lot. I think it's transforming a lot of what we do on the consultative side. That's both working with vendors. That's both an approach that's kind of across the board. So I'm excited to work internally to kind of revise a lot of our practices and how we work and use AI internally with some of our intellectual properties, as well as working with clients to sort of build out what their AI models look like for their organizations.
Great. So I'll ask you, just to start the conversation, just to sort of open up the conversation around this whole thread of implementations taking too much time and money. What are some of your knee-jerk reactions to the question I just asked the audience around what they think the real causes of delays and budget overruns are? I mean, if you had to summarize it, in 30 seconds or so, I know that's difficult to do because there's so many different variables that we'll cover here today. But what's your sort of overview or headline summary of why that is?
Labor, human labor. It's extremely hard to estimate work. I've kind of been on the dark side of this on the development end, and it was one thing I absolutely hated was, when are you going to be done? That question. You can project it and kind of say that it's going to take you 2 weeks or 3 weeks to develop a particular build object, and maybe it takes longer. Maybe there was a problem there that you just didn't forecast or see, and instead of 2 weeks, it takes 3 weeks, or instead of 3 weeks, it takes 4, and it just creates this domino effect. So it's really hard. It's really hard to predict some of the problems that you're going to see on projects. It's hard to plan for it. And so these are sensitive variables, and that you're kind of planning. Like we always talk about, oh, it's going to take a year or it's going to take 18 months, but for a given implementation project. And the reality is you a lot of times don't know until you kind of get into the middle of it and you're trying to manage to a timeline. And that always is just a difficult exercise for all of those involved, whether you're throwing more people at it, or you're resource constrained, or whatever the variables are on the client side. It just creates a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a big theme we'll touch on here today is this dynamic of projects like these, where so many things, like you just said, happen during the implementation, during the most expensive part of the implementation, when you've got the small army of tech consultants that are designing, building, deploying software, and the meter is running every hour, every day, every week that you delay whatever it is. It's not just that one decision or that one activity that's slowing down. It's the entire project. I mean, there's so many things on a critical path. The meter doesn't stop running just because, you've got one glitch in the project and you're trying to address one problem that's slowing down the entire thing. The problem is you end up paying the meter keeps running that entire time.
Yeah.
And so one way that we can think about this is, how can you move that pain, that messiness, the human dynamics and all the other issues that go along with it? How can we move that up front before the meter really starts running? Like, how can we work through that stuff and get as much of that out on the table, so that we have not all the answers, but we have at least most of the big rock types of answers defined for ourselves, so that by the time the small army of technical consultants are on site billing you by the hour, we can be as efficient as possible with those resources. And too often companies don't realize that by us slowing down in our decision making or responsibilities we have on the project, it's not like the consultants just stop billing and say, oh, hold on, Khalid's still making up his mind. Hold on, time out, let's stop billing. Right. They keep billing. I mean, they're billing you whether you're ready or not. And I think that's one of the most common dynamics we see.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, and there's a lot more to that, of course, that we'll get to. But I want to just real quickly turn to the audience. Thanks for those that have chimed in, where you're joining from. Adrian on LinkedIn is joining from Montreal, Canada. Thank you for joining today. Darian on LinkedIn that says good morning. Thank you for joining. And then Alcinda on LinkedIn says, afternoon, everyone from Johannesburg, South Africa. One key reason digital transformation projects take time and are costly is the lack of buy-in from the business, which delays execution and implementation. Yeah. So again, it's not like you can. I don't want to suggest that it's easy if you just get all the buy-in and the buy-in from the business up front. But if you can start that process as early as possible, that's going to eliminate a lot of the resistance and headwinds you get later on in the project. So that's an important point here. Here's a question we can get to in just a moment. In fact, maybe we just dive right into it. This is from Carmen on LinkedIn. Carmen says, very interesting point of view. I'm curious to know your thoughts on agentic AI. And do you think that we'll see automation tools like process mining and AI working together to understand decisions and processes? So maybe let me just open that up a little bit and say, how we'll dive into one of the first threads here around AI. How are we seeing AI improve and streamline implementations to make them more effective? And here we're talking about the implementation itself, not necessarily the end use of AI at the end of the day, which is a whole nother conversation that you and I have had before. But this is more about how can we use AI during implementation to kind of take control of the project and make it more efficient and more effective longer term.
Across the board, across the development life cycle, certainly in different ways. If you're thinking about it in a process format, the way that question was suggested, a big thing that jumps to my mind is data cleansing. And how that is totally different now. It's different with respect to the platforms and how we would migrate and kind of get there. Certainly, in a lot of the work that we're doing with clients and really asking them, pushing them to think a little forward about their data models and how they could be how they could leverage more out of their data models with AI. If you move that into the implementation space, a big thing that used to be a huge thing. I mean, I've done a lot of data cleansing exercises. We've seen, I don't know how many projects that have been delayed or pushed because the data wasn't where it needed to be in the format and structure that it needs to be. It usually takes some time, especially with complicated data models. You throw a couple AI agents in there, and all of a sudden, something as complex as data cleansing becomes simple. We used to have to do programs, SQL programs, to sort of routines that we would build in to make sure some models are cleaned. We would have even a little more manual exercise. There's a lot of companies out there that you can pay a lot of money to per record to just make sure that that it's clean. Now we kind of have the capability of kind of creating kind of this automation, for it. And even some of these tools, certainly ones that we're working with, they're just accepting data in raw form, and they're not even asking you to clean it, saying, "Oh, don't worry about it. It'll be clean kind of once we get there." Why? Because of a lot of these agents. So that's the top of mind thing that kind of jumps to mind of something that was really complicated, causing a ton of delays, and now it's sort of not that big of a deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And in addition to data cleansing and migration too, which you're right, that's such a super labor intensive process historically that now AI can help with. It doesn't, solve all the problems, all the
Right.
world's problems, but it does help for sure.
Right.
But I want to talk a little bit about the tool we use at Third Stage. We have something we call Mission Control AI, which is really an AI tool that we use from start to finish, from the early strategy and requirements definition phase of a project through the actual implementation itself, the design, the build, the test, all that stuff. So that Mission Control AI tool is meant to do two things. One is to automate what used to be a very labor intensive, expensive process, because you were paying expensive consultants to do a lot of that labor intensive work. But also it's capturing things using technology that humans oftentimes will miss. And it's serving as sort of a repository. In addition to the intelligence of AI, it's also serving as somewhat of a repository for, every workshop we have with the client, any type of requirements definition or any types of information we gather from the client along the way. Talk to us a little bit about this Mission Control AI tool and kind of how are you seeing it and how are our team seeing it streamline our own processes?
There's a lot of meetings that happen on an implementation project. I mean, you have weekly cadence with core team, sure. But then you have all of these satellite meetings that are occurring at the SME, and these are the important ones. Just information that's captured there from a consulting perspective, as well as from a client perspective. And you physically cannot attend every single meeting on a implementation, and that's even a small one. A large one, you can just kind of forget about it, and that's why these project meetings become important, because that's really where you start to bring everything that happened across the different departments and across the different meetings. You sort of start to collaborate to sort of create, okay, how are we going to troubleshoot? Where are there areas of problems in this particular implementation, or where are we kind of running into headwind? Well, with tools like what we're using kind of here, is we can put all of our information in a project repository. Now it's so much easier to query, so much easier to kind of really track not just all of the intricacies that's happening into these particular meetings, but we can start to relate broader things that we hold dear and have held dear for some time, with things like requirements, or why a given project is of value to an organization from a business, from a benefits perspective, right? The core reasons why you decided to do an implementation in the first place. Can you imagine flagging those things to kind of be able to say kind of when you have a conflict against this core theme, right? It might have been a revenue driver or a key piece of function that really made the executive team, really made the organization say, no, we really need to move in this direction beyond just our systems are old, but key functions. Like, can you imagine flagging that in an implementation and say, is anything that comes against this, anything that runs contrary to this particular benefit, we want to know. Like we want to raise that as a red flag. And you're not in the meetings all the time where this is happening. And so it is a chore to naturally track all of these variables that go into an implementation strategically, all these strategic variables that are happening in an implementation. And so with kind of the tools that we have and what we're kind of building in are just smart, efficient ways for us to kind of really create a repository of sort that allows us to just make sure that we're constantly pushing towards the best version of ourselves from a systems perspective. And it's definitely, it's not something that we could have imagined a while back, but it's just kind of one of those elements that are available for us now that we can really use to really drive a better outcome for our clients and what their long-term systems experience will be.
Yeah, and it's, an example, or just to give a couple examples of how, in addition to capturing information that either you're not in every meeting, or even if you are in every meeting, I mean, how many times have you or I try to document through our notes everything here? Yeah. You just aren't going to catch everything. I mean, you can't think fast enough and type fast enough to capture everything. Whereas when you have an AI agent sitting in on a meeting and capturing every word that's spoken, now all of a sudden you're capturing all the nuances, every little detail that may not seem important at the time, or maybe it's not important enough to capture in all your detailed notes. But now suddenly AI is capturing everything to where you can go back later and say, give me the 20 biggest business benefits in the production planning function. Mm-hmm. And it can spit out based on everything it's learned, throughout the project. It can spit that out. Plus, the other cool thing about it is it learns from other clients that we work with. So similar industries or similar types of companies, it can suggest other types of benefits based on that over time as we continue to train it. But I think that's, you think about the time it takes to create a business case, and now all of a sudden it can give you at least a starting point based on all the information it has, or a change impact assessment for change management, or, define what the biggest process improvements are going to be. When it comes time for testing, create a test script. There's so many different things that we could do that are downstream outputs from an upstream activity that AI now is capturing and collating and working with. So that right there, I mean, that's not only speeding things up, but it's also capturing more detail and more nuances that oftentimes humans are going to miss.
Yeah, like to the transcript level. In our case, just kind of going back to like, where are we getting this from? And being able to put our finger on, in this meeting, this happened, right? So we can always have context, right? In the event that, maybe that wasn't the capture that we sort of needed, we can kind of go back and quality check kind of where we're getting certain things from. So it's a very, very valuable tool across all the elements that you're suggesting, in including management of a given project. It just keeps us honest on the consulting side, less guesswork. The information is all available there. There's really no need to do a lot of guessing. And so, no, I'm excited about the way we're going to use this, the way we are using this, and kind of how that's morphing into the future there. So, no, it's all the things that you're suggesting.
Yeah. Here's a couple comments from the audience here. Amar on LinkedIn says, in my opinion, the main reason, and this is a response to the question, by the way, of why do you think, I asked the audience, why do you think projects get delayed and cost more than expected? Amar says, in my opinion, the main reason is that implementers are often full of hype and fancy ideas, while enterprises are constrained by the harsh realities of their day-to-day operations. And I think that's a really good point, that I think it's really easy for an outside implementer to come in and say, hey, we can deploy your technology in, like you said, 12 months. And they probably can, but you as a business probably aren't going to be able to consume those changes and change your business fast enough to meet that 12 months timeline. So
I think there's a dramatic difference between sales and execution. So, in the sales cycle, yeah, I guess we can term that hype and fancy ideas. They are selling you. They're telling you the best qualities of themselves. It's not even a lie, really. It's just they're singing their own praises, saying that I'm good at the following. But to your point, yeah, just because you're good at that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be an ideal fit for us, at least even in function, right? It might be hard to implement for a host of reasons at a given organization. And when you're not sensitive to that, it can come back and bite you. And that's kind of one of those things where you have a strategic value point of, we are buying this system for us to have the following functionality. People buy on a few core reasons. And I think those reasons are important. You're spending millions of dollars on those small reasons. Let's say there's 10 of them. It's not going to be 100. Let's say it's really 10 core reasons or 5 core reasons of why this software is the best thing for us to go ahead and do in comparison to everything else. Those things should be tracked. And I think that in the middle of those implementations, you kind of get further down the line. It's so easy in a normal implementation to just get lost and forget about those, or to come in conflict with, well, we didn't foresee that we weren't going to be able to implement this core function because the way your organization works, or maybe the politics, maybe there's a lot of resistance or headwind. There's just a bunch of reasons why that could be static or could be problematic. And when that happens, I think it puts the value case in jeopardy. It's like, we spent millions to do this. Why would we want to jeopardize that? And we don't always have those voices or those moments in implementation projects where we can flag those things and say, guys, this is a core tenet. This is one of the reasons why we bought this in the first place. I get that you may not want to do it, or there may be some resistance there, but because this is a core tenet, it's very important that we do this, and we do this the right way, and keep everyone honest on the project as to why this is an important feature.
Yeah, and it kind of relates to a comment from Kamal on LinkedIn. Says, not to forget the log, the history, things get forgotten. And, you look at a 12, 18, 24, 36 month project, stuff changes. Yeah.
Very, very, and not only is it easy to not only is it easy to forget some of those core things change. If you can imagine an acquisition model, a business that is ending up buying other companies, you can get an acquisition in the middle of an implementation can really put things in a weird space, because if it's a large acquisition, or even if it's a small, it may kind of change some dynamics, priorities, puts a lot of pressure on a lot of resources. It really can put a strain on a given project, and it can change the dynamics of why we decided to do this in the first place. We didn't know we were going to buy this company 6 months or a year into the implementation. So things get forgotten, yes, but things also change for the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And people just forget stuff too. They forgot that, oh yeah, we did talk about that. Or, oh yeah, we had that stakeholder in that one meeting, and they pointed out this nuance in our process that none of the rest of us fully understand. And you don't want to forget that stuff.
Yeah, and with our tools now, we can point to the conversation, say, no, you said it in this conversation, kind of at this point, and that's not to track or put your finger in a negative way on things, but again, it's to keep track of those core elements that are really driving the reasons why we want to do this one way or the other. So, things I absolutely get forgotten. I think it's human nature to in a chaotic environment to not remember the full detail of why you thought what you were thinking or why we decided to go in one direction or the other. So it's very natural
Yeah.
to have a challenge with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Carmen on LinkedIn says, yes, data is so important. I think of data as the blood flow in the body. Thank you. Great feedback on this.
It is,
So it is.
especially for AI.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, especially with AI. Alamgir on YouTube says nice. So thank you for the for the comment there. And then this is an interesting comment from Adrian that I want to open up to another question here. But Adrian on LinkedIn says, I think most people think ERP is an IT project. Reason I want to hone in on this for a second is because this sort of gets back to another issue that happens or leads to delays in projects, which is you get a proposal from a software vendor and they give you that 12 or 18 month timeline to implementing technology. And then one of the fatal flaws or mistakes that companies often make is they take that plan at face value, which is an IT project. I mean, what they're proposing is an IT project, which is deploying technology. It's not transforming your business, changing your people, changing your processes. It's putting new technology in place. So it gets into this whole, let's call it a combination of PMO and phase zero up front. You've got to define what the real full plan is going to be, not just the technical plan, but all the other stuff that needs to happen. And all that other stuff is not typically being proposed by your software vendor or your system integrator or technical implementer. So talk to us a little bit about setting up a PMO in that whole phase zero planning stage that's, so important to help overcome this challenge that Adrian mentions.
Well, I mean, the planning is everything. It's you have to have a successful plan. You have to have a successful approach, and there's certainly best practice in that exercise, and you want to be lined up to that best practice. But you almost have to even plan for those variable elements that are happening. So the structure of your governance model for a given project is about as important as your plan itself. So that, like you mentioned, we were kind of talking a little bit earlier to kind of say that, we're planning for a 12-month cycle. It's not going to hit exactly at 12 months. So even the idea that it's going to hit at 11 and a half, or it's going to hit at 13 and a half, like, how do you plan for the shifts that inevitably are going to come? Well, the way you do it is by having a tight governance model. That PMO structure there lines up with governance and how you kind of want to structure things. I think you want to have a certain quality element in that. Client management is important. You'll have vendor management. They'll always want to bring in their PM and want to drive the project certainly from theirs, but that is a build perspective. That is where their accountabilities lie. To your point, you're going to have your own, and so you want to think about project management not as a singular exercise. You want to think about it as a team. You want to think about it as a small group that's responsible for a very important initiative, and you want to think about who is that group, what does that team look like. Every role there matters, and the role that the vendor plays huge. But you can't be distracted by them in terms of, you don't need this, you don't need this. That's not your call to tell us as an organization what we need. Your call is to build this thing and to make sure that you build it correctly, right? Your call isn't to tell us what the test scripts look like, as an example. Right? No, we have to build the test scripts as a part of that. We have to manage the change. We have to manage how we want our data model to look post implementation, as well as during the implementation itself, as well as even trying to migrate it from our various systems, which legally, vast majority of vendors can't help you with. So it's an exercise, and I think that all hands should be on deck. And when I think of what a PMO is, I just think about that collection of hands. and saying that this is the group that's going to move us towards success. And you want to think about who is in that management room, not the core team. You know, you have your core team, your project team, and your strategic members, and your best and brightest. You have that core team, but when you think about that management circle, it's small. I have been, as an example, especially when, you know, my Big Four days, I have been in PMO groups where you have like 8 people managing multi-million-dollar projects, all project managers, not like one project manager and they're doing this, but you have this team of about 8 different project managers that you certainly have a lead there, but you still have like 8, a bunch of different folks that are trying to navigate this huge kind of project. And so you want to think about this as a team exercise and not as an individual exercise to kind of manage that towards success.
I'm here with Khalid Morris from Third Stage Consulting. We're chatting about how to speed up your implementation time and cost. We've got a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Just tell me what you've got to say to me. I've been waiting for so long.
My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well. So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
I guess what you say is true. I could never be the right kind of girl for you. I could never be your woman. I could never be your woman.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 230. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. This is the tech agnostic podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation success. And we're here talking with Khalid Morris from the Third Stage Consulting team about how to speed up your implementation and save time and money throughout your transformation. And we'll jump back into the conversation. You know, it also gets into another nuance or another root cause of implementation delays, and that is when organizations defer too much to the software vendor. Like you were saying, like, you know, it's not up to the vendor to tell you how you're going to run your business. They can give you advice. They can tell you what they've seen work at other clients, or they can give you advice based on how the software works. But it's very misleading to think that you can just rely on the vendor to make these decisions for you. And ultimately it should be the other way around. You should be telling the vendor what you need and managing it more actively and more aggressively. But too often organizations have this sort of learned helplessness because they're not the experts in ERP, which is understandable. They don't do this for a living. They have a real day job they've got to do. Their day job and expertise is not managing projects like these. So you do need the outside experts, but you need to manage those experts, not the other way around. And I think that sense of empowerment and control and ownership of projects, that's a big part of what's missing.
Yeah.
And when you do that and you defer to the vendors, now all of a sudden they have there's no skin off their back if the project takes longer and costs more than expected. In fact, it helps them. So you've created this weird, perverse incentive to delay the project.
I remember the shifts, and I think we've talked about this in other podcasts, but how the industry has shifted over the years from programmatic to cloud, and now kind of getting into AI. ERP companies are extremely powerful organizations from a financial perspective, and that's across the tiers. I mean, they just have a ton of money, especially from a software as a service model where you have this sort of subscription-based approach where they're getting this revenue on a monthly, quarterly basis or whatnot. So with that, they kind of come in with this approach of this is the way you need to operate, right? And to some degree, I understood it a little bit more when it was so standardized, right? When we moved from a programmatic world to a software as a service world, the standardization of it all made a little sense to them. It's like, well, they're trying to tell you, this is kind of how you need to function. All the companies on our platform function this way. We built it this way for you to do it. We're kind of billing in a lot of best practice, blah, 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 blah. And you companies are kind of following suit. But now as we move towards AI, we're kind of moving out of that standardization and back into a world almost closer to programmatic where customizations are a little more important, where the way I want to do things matters more than the way that we functioned, or all the companies have to function in your standardization world, right? The world of ERP is getting a little lighter from a systems perspective and less dependent from an organizational perspective when they're thinking about their model. And the world of, this is kind of the way we're going to operate, and this is the way so I say that to say it's even more important now that you start to drive how you want this story to go for you and for your organization. Is going to require that vision. It's going to require that strategy. And you're going to have to dictate to a lot of these ERP companies, this is where you're fitting in my model, not where I'm fitting in your model. Right? Because this is how our organization is going to function. And this is where our organization is getting a ton of strategic information from. Hopefully that's coming from an AI layer. But this is kind of the way we're using our systems tools. And you're just a part of that story. You're not the entire story.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think we're dancing around a question here that I want to pull up. This is from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, when you talk about delays and the domino effect, what are some of the most common causes you've seen trigger that first domino? And we talk a lot here at Third Stage about symptoms versus root causes. The symptom would be something like we over customized the software, therefore that's why the project got delayed. It could be, but that's really a symptom oftentimes of something deeper, which is you had poor project management or program governance in place, or perhaps you didn't have good change management in place and people were resisting the change when maybe they didn't need to. So that's why they customized the software. So what do you see as some of the biggest root causes or first dominoes to fall?
I think those are the biggest two. I really think those are the biggest two. The change management aspect of this, I don't think can be understated. Resistance is a huge thing. I think that once you kind of get on these projects, it's the last thing that a traditional PM thinks about is, what does our change management model look like? Or do we want to pay for OCM? You're already paying for OCM. The question is, are you planning for OCM? Do you understand what you're paying for in your model that has changed, right? Training falls in the OCM camp. To me, testing has, in my mind, changed and turned into an entirely OCM exercise. You can learn a lot about how you adopt just based on how you test. And so it goes back to, well, why would you allow a vendor to tell you how to test? You should tell the vendor, this is how we're going to test. This is how we're going to sign off. It turns into an exercise of certainly exchange, knowledge, understanding, but it's also an opportunity for you to start to drive what your organization looks like. Well, how do you do that? This is where your change model comes in place, and it can't just be a matter of dates on a project plan. It has to sort of be a strategic initiative to where you have a plan for how your organization is going to absorb this software. That comes with resistance. Resistance is part of that. You have people that have anxiety, that have concerns and that sort of thing. So when you say like, how does these things, like that resistance doesn't form right when you get to a point where it's time for you to test or train. The resistance forms early with people saying, I'm not sure about this thing. I don't know if we'll be able to learn this. You have people that may not even like the software. You may have selected a software that they wanted a different software. So they're already a center of resistance, and you haven't even started on day one. So I don't think resistance can be undersold. It starts. How do you bring those aboard? How do you engage? How do you bring aboard those folks that have doubts? Like that is all a part of what OCM is about, and it should be a part of your project plan, because you should be anticipating that you're going to encounter a certain level of resistance, or you're going to encounter resistance in your project. Like you should know that that's going to happen and have a plan for how you're going to manage that.
Right. Yeah. It makes total sense. And I think a lot of what we're getting to here is planning, ownership, managing change, and just understanding dependencies and what goes into these projects. These projects are typically a lot more complicated than most organizations realize. So those are really good points. Here's a comment from Kamal on LinkedIn. Kamal says, I just joined. Great to hear leveraging AI to accelerate and improve data cleansing, consistency, and completeness of the master data. AI can do 150,000 material master and 50,000 bills of material lines in a couple of seconds.
They really can.
Yeah.
And that used to be manual effort.
Yeah. And the big four, you and I both come from the big four, and the model there was let's offshore that to some lower cost resources in India or wherever it is. Now you don't even need to do that. You can just use AI to speed things up, and you're probably going to get a better product a lot faster and a lot cheaper. The question I have, I don't have a good answer for this. I don't necessarily expect that you would, Khalid, but I'd be curious to hear your opinion or your educated guess on this if you don't have a strong knowledge about it. But I'm wondering if the big four the big consultancies especially, they make so much of their money on this low cost, low value type of activity. Those are high margin things for them to have these people in India cleaning up data, or having the junior consultants documenting requirements and training scripts and all this stuff. Now AI is taking that need away. Do you think the big consulting firms are adjusting their pricing model accordingly? In other words, are they charging their customers less now, or do you think what do you think they're going to do? Because it's going to disrupt their whole business model now. So I'm just curious what you think will happen.
Well, I think if Accenture is any indicator of it, they just laid off a substantial number of resources.
Okay.
They laid off thousands of resources. I don't know if it was 20,000 or so, but they certainly reduced their labor force worldwide by a few percentage points. I want to say like 3% or something crazy like that. But anyways, a lot of employees were laid off. And I think it's directly to exactly what you're saying, and the role of AI and the way that they're planning on becoming more efficient at this. They're planning on using AI in some of these more labor intense kind of areas. And the older model of let's just throw a ton of people at the problem and continue to charge folks just doesn't really work. You want to be as efficient as you can be. So that will be my guess. And I mean, obviously I don't work at Accenture anymore, but I do know people that actually have been laid off as a part of this effort and exercise. But no, I don't have any firsthand knowledge that that's exactly what they're doing. But that would be my guess, if you will, on how they plan on dealing with some of this.
Yeah, and actually, as I asked you that, I was pulling up here. If you notice me looking away, I was listening to you, but I was pulling up one of our team members during holiday weekend. It was a holiday here in the U.S. last week, and I didn't see this. I saw the headline, but I didn't read the article until just now. But it's an article that sort of answers the question I brought up, which I didn't think of until you started answering it. But it said it's an article that says PwC clients ask for an AI discount, and Big Four firms are losing hundreds of partners. But it says here in the article, this is just really interesting, that it says that PwC is saying that clients want a break on prices since the firm is bragging about making big technological leaps in efficiency, according to Bloomberg. And it says PwC has cut prices for some services as clients raise the fact that the consultancy is using AI to complete its work faster. And then the quote from one of the chief AI officer at PwC is, clients would hear us talking about using AI and say, we want our fair share of those efficiencies. We certainly, as appropriate, give our clients the pricing benefit of the efficiencies that we're achieving. But he said he was the article says he was a bit evasive in the interview. Priest declined to provide further details on PwC's pricing, saying that the firm's broad approach is to align AI-driven gains with client benefit, whether that's in efficiency, timeliness, quality, or cost. It's a very Big Four consultant type of answer there. He estimated, however, that tech consulting firms have improved the efficiency of the systems integration business by roughly 30% with AI. So his number is 30% you could save in the system integration cost, but it sounds like the issue is they're not necessarily passing that cost savings down to clients, which that's a whole nother ethics question.
And that's that 30% is specific to them. So think about that on the development side, right? Like you can totally see it on the development side in terms of how quickly they're putting together even some of this code, right? Like you can push that along the curve, right? And get into, we've already talked about data and the efficiency kind of there. I mean, obviously AI isn't necessarily going anywhere, but along every point of the software development lifecycle, there are efficiency gains there. There are cost savings, time savings, even value gains, as we talked about with core strategic parts of why you decided to do this in the first place, right? There's just so many different ways to kind of deal with this. And, you know, even the Big Four, whether they want to deal with it or not, they're kind of forced to. And they're being impacted in a ton of ways. Contracts cut, you know, what you're kind of sharing, you know, laying off workforce, you know, these are all elements of having to deal with a marketplace that's adjusting to sort of this new advanced kind of functionality that, you know, saves some time and effort.
Yeah. And for a lot of companies, when they bring in these system integrators or these outside, especially the bigger consulting firms, a lot of times there's no questions asked. Like, why do we have 30 people on this project full time? Do we need all 30 of these people? What if we only had 25? Would that be the end of the world? What would that look like? You know, no one really asks those questions. And it's almost like it reminds me of the Wizard of Oz. You know, they don't look behind the curtain. Like, don't look and see how this is actually done. Just don't ask questions, and we will be best friends if you just don't ask questions of why we have 30 people on this project. But it's amazing to me how many executives say, okay, well, you're the experts if you think 30 people are required. Whereas now if I were a CIO or a CFO, I'd be saying, we don't need 30 people, partially because you've staffed this up as though it's going to be a compressed project. We know it's going to take longer than that. So let's lower the run rate and the burn rate, staff it at a lower level, because we're going to deliberately go at a slower pace than what the vendor wants us to. And secondly, we know we can save a lot of time and money with AI, and we use it like at third stage, we use AI as a way to undercut our competitors. Now we're looking at ways like, how can we price ourselves in a way that we're adding huge amounts of value, but at a lower cost compared to our competitors. So I think that if you're a buyer of technology and related services, you really have to be asking those tough questions of why.
And it's tough for them to ask those questions because they don't really know the mechanisms or kind of how a lot of this stuff functions. But, you know, 30 is a lot. And I've been on projects I've had a project team of like 50 people, or if it felt like around 50, maybe the full team was, you know, it's a long time ago. So, but yeah, I've had big project teams like that. When you think about offshore and then the onshore parts of this, it probably was more like 30, and our full project team was probably more like, it was plus 60. I mean, there was just a lot of people on this given project. And one of the biggest challenges with that is just bringing all of that together. So I do something in a little bubble, somebody else does something in a little bubble, and it's kind of hard to kind of get to a place where we're all kind of pulling in the same direction, or especially from a code perspective. I write one way, so you write another way. It's kind of like pulling together a document, and each one writes a different chapter. It's like, well, but it still needs the same voice, it still needs the same this or that. So it's a challenge to kind of have to manage that many people. And so now you get into efficiency. You don't even want that many people, to make a long story short. You kind of want it to kind of get a little tighter, a little bit more efficient that way. And the smarter your team, smarter your team is, I think the better you'll have. Your integration will be better. You think your overall project will sort of be better. And so you want to limit those numbers as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. And the last thing you need is a consulting partner just to add to the complexity and the chaos of these sorts of projects. And unfortunately, that's oftentimes what happens. I want to get to an area we haven't really touched on, but we've sort of alluded to it maybe in passing. And that's this concept of internal staffing and resource allocation of your own resources. So, one early dynamic that gets companies into trouble is that they get all excited and enamored for a certain technology. Let's just say it's SAP or Oracle or whatever it is. Doesn't matter. It's a big vendor. They've chosen this new software, and the vendor puts pressure on them, like, hey, sign this contract. You get a big deal. We'll get our staff out there, and starting next week, we'll start designing and building. We've got this 18-month plan. The time's a ticking. Let's go. And so the technology consultants oftentimes will show up, and you're not ready. You haven't even figured out, what your team's going to look like. You haven't moved them off of their day jobs to free up some time. So tell us a little bit about internal staffing and how that affects these projects in terms of getting stuff done on time, and also just the overall ownership and control of the project. How do you see internal staffing fitting into all this?
Well, for different companies, staffing means a little different. When you get into small and mid-sized businesses, they have to often wear different hats. And the one thing that I hear from organizations like that is we don't have a lot of time. And
Right.
so from a staffing perspective, you're kind of already, with those kind of organizations, it's already difficult because they almost don't want to be there because they have a bunch of other stuff to do to kind of keep the business driving in a particular direction. In larger organizations that do have a lot of resources, they can kind of have a little bit more dedicated staffing. But then sometimes the projects get really large because they just sort of throw a bunch of people at it, and kind of you have the problem that we just discussed. So resourcing here is very, very important. I think you want to start with best and brightest, and you want to make sure that you have the right designers of your organization, because that's what happens on these kind of projects is they start to design processes that you're going to live in for a long time. And if they design it the wrong way, your organization is going to find ways to fight against it, right? Whether that's workarounds or different ways that they can do what they need to do, despite the fact that they have this process in place that really doesn't give them the things that they want. So I think that the resourcing here, you want your best and brightest. You want collaborative folks, because you have to socialize a lot of information. Like I said, there's a lot of small meetings that are almost happening in back rooms on implementation projects, and that information has to come to light. And that information has to get across the organization so that everyone's kind of on the same page. And then you have to have the OCM element there just to make sure that people have an understanding and are able to adopt. So resourcing is very, very important. And I think those are the two elements that you want to think about the most. You want someone who's one of your best and brightest, but you also want someone who's collaborative and can serve as a change agent for your organization overall, so that you can kind of have those high adoption rates that you really need in order to really have a successful implementation post go live.
Right. Right. Yeah, and it's okay to put off your technical vendors and wait until you're ready. You know, wait until you've got your team in place, because the more they take off without you, you know, and get ahead of you, you've lost
It's
control of the project.
it's a Titanic. You know, implementations are a Titanic, and so it's very easy to point them in the right direction at, you know, when you start your journey, but you know, when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to move them. And so that's why the governance model is important. That's why the plan is very important. You really want to understand your North Star and sort of move towards that direction. Because the moment you figure out you're not moving towards that direction, it's just a chore to try to get it and play catch up. And you know, even like with us and our consultative exercise, we want to be there in the very beginning, because if you can imagine, when you're not, you know, you're trying to play catch up to multiple teams that are off and running, and that's always very difficult to do.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And Russell on LinkedIn is echoing what you were just saying, Khalid. Russell says the project team with clearly defined responsibilities must be in place before the kickoff of the meeting, or before the kickoff meeting. An
Yeah.
external consultant will be a good idea too. So yeah, thank you for that, Russell. That's why clients hire us, is to help establish that PMO and help get the right internal staff in place and get the right
But
governance.
you know, one thing with that is, you know, I think there's a certain amount of care and timing that should take into that. Roughly a month after you sign your paper and everyone's excited to do it, and there's kind of this rush. The implementer is getting their team together. They're finally, now they have sort of the license to sort of staff this the way that they're sort of looking to do, and they're trying to create a kickoff. And I typically don't like a lot of the kickoffs that I see, because I feel it's a missed opportunity to really come into this from a collaborative exercise and kind of say, here, these are all the people involved. This is kind of what the expectation is. I think from a change management perspective, you can do a great deal of good by having a really good kickoff, really, and making sure that the ambiguity there is less. And sometimes that takes a little more time, but I feel, this is just my own personal viewpoint here, I think you should take more time with your kickoff, more time on that planning exercise to make sure that all the teams are in place, and to make sure you're showing a unified front, rather than this is what I'm doing, I'm taking you in this direction or that direction. From a PM perspective, that PMO model that you were kind of saying there, where the whole team is kind of coming together and kind of saying that we're the group that's going to help lead you guys to where it's going to be. This is what your teams look like. These are the people that you'll want to look and get this particular information from. This is where we're going to need you in the project. This is where we're not going to necessarily need you. All that stuff can really resolve a ton of anxiety, rather than just kind of introducing yourself, saying, hi, I'm here now. We're really excited about doing this whole thing that's going to affect you and your jobs, blah, 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 blah. I just think we're missing a lot of opportunities with kickoffs overall.
Yeah, I agree. And a lot of what we're talking about here too is related to this whole phase zero planning. What are the things you need to do up front? And if you're interested, I'm going to put a QR code right here on the top left-hand side of the screen. If you scan this QR code, you can get access to our phase zero checklist. It's something you can get for free on our website. If you just scan that QR code, you can get that. It just gives you a checklist of all the things you should be thinking about before you get too far into your project in the early stages of planning, whether you're in the selection phase, you're evaluating technology and trying to select software, or maybe you've already selected the software and you're trying to figure out how to plan for the implementation. So I'll leave that up here for a second and let you scan that to get access to our phase zero checklist. But another interesting comment here. I don't know if you know this, Khalid. I think you might know this. I'm a bit of a conspiracy theorist at times, and I apparently have a fellow conspiracy theorist on the discussion here today. This is from Russell on LinkedIn. Russell says, where they don't want an ERP is they may not be able to make money or commit fraud. This could also be a reason for resistance to change. So I think it's a funny comment. I think you might be serious, but either way, whether you're kidding
I hope
or
not.
yeah.
You know, I hope not. And I definitely think that if you don't have any ERP or your systems kind of in place, then it's definitely easier to kind of have those leaks in your overall operating model. So, he really might be onto something there.
Yeah, but I think the message is, you have to understand what the causes of resistance are. It's not really, are people going to resist change? They will resist change at some
You're
point. It
going
could
to.
could be because of fraud. It could be because just I don't want to let go of that spreadsheet that I
The
developed
vast,
myself.
I think the vast majority of folks are not necessarily bad actors. I think that resistance is natural.
Yeah.
I think that your first instinct to change is, I don't know. I just think when someone presents it to you and says, we're about to do something very different and you've never done this before, I think the first thing that pops into your mind is sort of to question it and to kind of say, are we sure that this is a good idea? Now, the more information you get on it, the more you start to maybe, start to get pulled into that direction. But that resistance is an element of any implementation. And I think it's more a matter of what are the ways to engage that? Like, how do we deal with it? How do we deal with the bad actors, that are really out to derail this implementation? How do we identify those guys? How do we work with that? How do we work with the people that are hesitant? How do we work with our older employees that just present a challenge to learning technology? How do we deal with the employees that aren't even here yet? The employees we want to gain. Maybe you want to do this because you want to find or you need to find resources in the marketplace that can support something that currently your current staff can't. So there's so many levels to how you're going to be managing this from a resistance perspective to me, that it's just important that you have engagement and an understanding of what that looks like. There's a lot of great models out there, a lot of study in this from the business dynamic, whether we're talking about things like Cotter or we're kind of dealing with methods like ADCAR and different things. There's smart approaches to sort of dealing with resistance. And I believe that it's very, very important that that you do so.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Makes total sense. And a couple of comments here from Kamal on LinkedIn. What I often see is that companies embarking on large ERP programs like SAP have a different DNA. They excel at designing and building great products, not running complex IT implementations. SAP is a different beast, and most ERP systems are a different beast, but especially SAP. So that's great comments there.
They're a different dynamic, and I fully agree with that. But I honestly, and we've had this conversation, and obviously in my role, I'm on the AI side. I think AI is starting to bleed a lot into ERP. It's starting to bleed a lot into the dependence of companies and their ERPs, right? So as you think and have that conversation of those differentiating elements of kind of ERP systems and how they behave, I think the next conversation is how our behavior is changing and how that relationship is working between what that behavioral changes in our organization from an AI perspective and the ERP element itself. Like I think that's just a core question. I think everyone is dealing with it. We just talked about how we're dealing with it in our own consultative sort of exercise or industry, and certainly our own practice. Everyone, within their organizations are dealing with it just the same. And so I think you have to balance that question, because after you balance that question, I think you're going to come to some harder realities, which is we're not really using our ERP system as much as I thought we were.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've got a closing question for you then, Khalid. What we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked a lot about different things, but if you were to give one piece of advice to a leadership team or a project team about to start a transformation, what would that be? Just in terms of wanting to mitigate risk, save time and money, not let this turn into a money pit, not let it turn into total disaster. How do you avoid that failure? What are the big tips you'd leave us with?
Well, you know me, and this is something we talk about all the time. You always start with strategy. My thought, though, goes to where are we in our cycle? If you're very early in this point, and I think you have a huge strategic window to sort of really game out what does our model now look like going forward. What do we need it to look like? What do we want it to sort of look like? And I think at that point, you really have the opportunity to create a business case for why certain elements make sense and certain elements don't. I would actually encourage organizations now, we certainly do this, but I would encourage organizations to really do a business case at the early points to really say, what does ERP look like for us? What does our model need to look like? How are we leveraging AI within our organization strategically? What does our data model kind of look like kind of going forward to really figure out a long-term plan for how all of this works? That doesn't necessarily mean go rush out and buy a new ERP system, right? That could mean we can leverage what we have in our current state. We kind of need to make some tweaks around it. That could mean that could also mean that depending on what your model is, we might need an upgrade, we might need to shift. Whatever the ultimate outcomes of that is, I think that you can do that in a safe way. It may be an upfront cost to kind of doing that, but in the long term, I think that you gain a lot because you don't go running into one multi-million-dollar direction that later you come to find out is the wrong direction. And there's a lot of dynamics that are happening in the marketplace. So for me, early on, start your business case, get your strategy together, start your business case. If you already know what your strategy is and you're in the implementation element there, I think then the plan there becomes important. And I think a really important plan starts with understanding your deficiencies. What do you know? What do you not know? Being honest with that. You want to get done the parts of this as much as you can, internally. I fully get that, and I fully support that. But you're not built to build ERP systems or business systems in general. You're sort of built to build widgets that you're really good at building. And so bringing in the right partners, whether it's the A team, bringing in third-party groups like us in sort of strategic kind of ways, really getting that partner element down to say, do we have the right people in the room? Do we have the right PMO room? Really is almost like, we're getting into football season. I know you'll love this. We're getting into football season here coming up in a month. And you want to think about that quarterback room, right? That's that PMO room. Like, who is in that room? Who is driving the execution of our team? And if you don't have the right room, you're almost doomed to fail, right? If you don't set that up properly up front. So I think that starts with the partner conversation and understanding, what we have and who we need. And having that small team in place. And then from there, you can, I think, create the right plan and governance model for how you're going to move this towards a successful outcome. And that successful outcome should bleed into your post-live environment, bleed into adoption and having high rates and being able to track back and say, we decided to do this for these 5 core reasons. And I'm looking at it in a post-live environment. I see all 5, and that's success. And if you can't do that, you're on a piece of failure. You're either on a big part of that, if it's a big failure, or if it's just, well, we spent all this money and we don't get any value out of it. I think that is failure as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's great advice, very sound advice. And for those that are listening in that want to attend our Stratosphere conference, we're actually going to talk a lot more about some of these best practices that Khalid and I are discussing here today. We're going to talk about how to make your digital transformations more successful. We're hosting it. It's a virtual event, or it's a hybrid event. So it's part virtual. It's in person, but we're also streaming it virtually. That's what I meant to say from the start. That was a mouthful. I made that a lot more complicated than I needed to, but it's in person in Denver, but you can also join virtually if you can't make it to Denver. It's at the end of August. I'll leave the QR code up on the screen. You can go to stratosphere2025.com to learn more about and see the speaker lineup, the agenda, all that stuff. So be sure to check that out. If you use the discount code EARLYBIRD, you'll get 20% off the registration fee, whether you join virtually or in person. So I'd love to see you there if you'd like to learn more stuff like this. Well, thank you, Khalid. Thank you to the audience for the great questions and comments along the way. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to debrief and unpack a few of the threads that we talked about here. And then we're also going to get into how to cut through the ERP AI hype. So stay tuned. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Met her in a club down in Old Soho where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola.
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 230. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. And the show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, produced by Major Tom Productions. So thanks for being here today. So we just had Khalid on the show, Darian, and we talked a lot about AI as well as other strategies and tactics for speeding up implementation, saving time and money. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a great conversation. I always feel like Khalid has really great insight into AI, obviously. But there's definitely a couple points I want to expand on from the conversation, for sure. One of them being, I know you guys mentioned that AI reduces integration labor by 30%. But if that's true, how should consulting firms pass those savings on to their clients? I know that's one thing you guys kind of touched on, just wanting to dive deeper into that. Like, does that happen or how, and different things like that?
Yeah, it's and I pulled up that article somewhat ad hoc, and read it live as we were going through the conversation. So it was just sinking in as I was asking him the question too. But I think it sounds like from that one example or that article that I quoted, it sounds like, at least in the case of PwC, some of their clients are complaining that they're not passing those costs on to customers. And I find it really interesting because on one hand, these big consultancies want to be innovative. They know they have to adapt and adopt AI tools. But on the other hand, if you cut 30% of their cost, that's a pretty big deal when you're talking about a $10 million project now becoming a $7 million project. That's a pretty material impact. And so I think it's one of those things that runs counter to their self-interest, especially their consulting model where they rely so much on these high volumes of people doing relatively low value stuff at times at a very high margin. So that's just, it's hard. It's almost like a conflict of interest for themselves, because if they automate too much and become too innovative and then they save all this money for their clients, it actually hurts them. So then it sounds like what they might be doing is trying to find that gray area in between where maybe we save them a little bit of money, but we pocket the rest, and maybe we actually make a little bit more money, by saving time and money on AI. I do think all that should be passed on to customers. It's something we do. We pass it all on to customers. In fact, we also use our own AI tool. We're starting to use that to help drive efficiency with the SIs, because now it's almost getting more transparency into what the SIs are doing. If the SI comes to us and says, hey, we need 5 people to go through and analyze business requirements for 90 days, we can say, actually, you don't, because we've got it all in our AI model right here, and we can spit out a first draft of it literally in seconds while we're sitting here talking about it. So not to say that that solves everything and saves 100% of the time in that example, but you're probably going to save a pretty big chunk of time to where now clients can be looking at that and saying, wait, do we really need 5 people doing that activity for 90 days? It just doesn't make sense when we have AI tools that can do that for us. And so I think what I hope happens here is I hope it creates this demand from customers, a demand for more transparency into how the big consulting model works and how they're pricing stuff. Because it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. It's a lot of, hey, here's X number of bodies where the experts trust us. This is complicated. We need all 20 or 30 of these people on this project right now. And there's not a lot of challenging that goes on, at least from what we see. And those are the biggest risk projects too, by the way, the ones where the client doesn't challenge the big system integrator or the big consultancy. Those companies are much more likely to fail and run into problems because now they've let the fox guard the hen house and run away with an open checkbook. So I think the jury's still out. We'll see how things go in the next, in the coming months and years. But I think I'll be really curious to see how this unfolds.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point about these kind of bloated project team sizes, and I think you guys were talking about how they would have, 30 people on a project instead of 25, and maybe they don't need 30. Why are there so few CIOs and CFOs challenging these team sizes, and how should they go about challenging it if they want to?
Well, as far as why they do, there's so many human psychological and organizational psychological variables that go into it. In my opinion, I think why it starts with this whole cachet that the big consulting firms have. They've done a really good job of curating and manicuring their reputation over decades. I mean, and so much so to where they're so highly regarded that C-level people often think that, well, no one ever got fired for hiring Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, whoever, Ernst & Young. So that's the mentality oftentimes, but the problem is so many people get fired after hiring one of these firms, and the firm ends up staying, but the executive gets fired, and it just perpetuates itself. It's almost like, well, the problem was the executive, not the consulting firm. So they end up keeping the consulting firm because it's a big, well-known name, and everyone feels kind of safe by hiring one of those big known names, or the big, well-known names. So that's part of it. And I think the other part of it is these companies, and I was part of it at one point, and I saw it firsthand, and I was fascinated by it. I thought it was wrong, but I was super fascinated how this worked. At a young age, I noticed like how smooth these companies are. They're really good at sort of, you've got a disaster brewing here on this project, but somehow they've had a way of making executives feel good about it. Like it's this weird dynamic I can't explain, but like I would be on these projects where way over budget, way over time. And somehow the executives leave happy, feeling warm, fuzzy feelings because, the executives, the partners took them out to play golf and reassured them everything's fine, talked about all the big fancy clients that they're doing work with and everything's going to be fine here. And they just end up going along with it until they don't. And then they get, the executive gets fired, and then the next executive comes in. The same thing happens with the same partners at the same firm. So it's a strange dynamic. And I think that's a big part of it it's just human psychology and organizational psychology. As far as why people don't challenge it, I think it's a learned helplessness, especially on tech projects, because if you're hiring a big consultancy for their expertise in SAP or AI or whatever it is, you're not the expert in it. They are, so you're going to trust them. It's sort of like going to your doctor. If your doctor tells you, you have cancer or you need a knee replacement or whatever, a lot of people just won't ask questions. They'll say, "Oh, that sucks. How'd that happen?" And they won't ask to see the MRI. They won't ask to see the test results, but because you trust the doctor, right? And I think that's a lot of the dynamic you see with big consulting firms as well. They're the experts. They told us we need to spend $20 million on this project, so I'm not really going to ask questions. And in many cases, I'm not even going to go look for options because I feel safe that this company is best suited to help me, especially if I'm a big organization. So those are some of my opinions. I'd love to hear the audience's feedback on that too. If you've worked with or for a big consulting firm or any consulting firm for that matter, I'd be curious to hear what the audience thinks as far as some of those whys. Why is this stuff happening?
Yeah, absolutely. But such a great conversation as always with you and Khalid today.
Yeah, it was fun. It's always fun to have him on, and I'm sure we'll have him on again at some point in the near future. And we've got one more segment we want to get to that's somewhat related to what Khalid and I were just talking about, and this is how to cut through the ERP AI hype. So what we're going to do is we're going to roll you this clip, play the clip for you. It's from my YouTube channel, recently published, talking about the difference between the hype of AI in the ERP world versus the reality of it. And we'll talk about the deep, dark secrets that the ERP vendors don't want you to know. So let's roll the clip and we'll come back and talk about it. One of the common things we're hearing from clients right now is this dilemma between needing to replace their ERP software, needing to leverage or wanting to leverage AI software, and figuring out how those two technologies can potentially coexist. So what I want to do today is talk about the reality of where we stand here in 2025 with the world of AI and ERP together. And I also want to expose some of the myths and some of the things that vendors don't want you to hear. So be sure to stay tuned to the end of the video because I'll share the things about AI that software vendors don't want you to know. One of the most common questions we get from clients that are asking our team to help them with the evaluation and selection process of new technologies, one of the common questions we get is this whole AI embedded in ERP thing real? Is it all hype? Are companies actually using AI? Do ERP vendors actually have AI capabilities? And the answer is sort of. It's sort of a mixed bag. And so what I want to do is talk a little bit about where we're starting to see some traction in valid use cases of clients actually using AI in their businesses and in their ERP environments. I think if I were to summarize, I'd say that the most common low-hanging fruit that we're seeing right now is using AI in an ERP setting where there's high volumes of data and or high volumes of transactions and or high volumes of analysis required. So if you think about something like a manufacturer that needs to run an MRP, material resource plan, to figure out what raw materials to buy and when, how to get it to their shop floor at the right time so that they can produce and manufacture the products that their customers want when they want them. There's a lot of work that goes into that. And ERP software providers and ERP systems have historically struggled with that entire function because there's so much data that needs to be considered both internally to the organization and externally as well. We're also seeing AI being used in situations where you might have finance closes or really manual processes around a financial period end close. When you think about quoting proposals for a sales rep, that's another area where AI can help streamline and speed up some of those processes. And then in supply chain management, with complex global supply chains and tariffs and trade wars and physical wars, geopolitical issues throughout the world, managing supply chains is becoming a lot more complex than it used to be, and it requires a lot of knowledge, a lot of data that no one human can process themselves. And that's another area where AI is starting to really make a difference and make a dent in the use of ERP systems. But I think the biggest area that we're seeing AI have an impact with ERP systems is on the user interface side. And this is something that a lot of people don't talk about. We talk about how AI can be generative and create analysis or create master data or help complete transactions and things of that nature. But where we really see a lot of low-hanging fruit is just on the user interface side. You have these old clunky ERP systems that people are used to using. Now you've got AI prompts that you can just simply ask the system to provide whatever information you want. You think about your people in your organization and how often they have to go dig up information and figure out how to run or build a report to get the information they want. AI is largely taking a lot of that away to where you can just converse with AI and get the information you need. So that's probably the biggest impact we're seeing in the short term is on the user interface side of things. So these are just a few examples of how we're seeing AI in use, but what I want to do next is talk about the impact it's having to businesses, because there is a dark side of AI that a lot of us aren't talking about right now. So for as cool as AI is, and for all the potential it has from a technological perspective, there's some really bad news I want to share with you, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but that is that it's going to disrupt and impact your people in a potentially negative way in the short term, in a way that you've never seen before. And the reason we're starting to see signs of this is because even though AI has a lot of potential, it's also very disruptive. It's going to change and completely transform people's jobs in ways that may create a lot of anxiety. So let me give you an example, an actual use case of how people's jobs are being impacted by AI. I mentioned before how AI is automating and streamlining a lot of processes. You have people within your organization, I imagine, that have grown up and become accustomed to using complicated spreadsheets and going out and finding data and really thriving in your business with the use of heroics. They've got tribal knowledge and brute force that they can use to power through, and despite not having access or easy access to data, despite not having great tools, they've been able to create that spreadsheet or that workflow that only they know that's going to allow them to do what they need to do with the organization. And it's made those people highly valuable in your organization. Ask yourself this: do you have anyone in your organization that you just wouldn't want to lose? Not just because they're good people and you don't want to lose anyone, but because they know so much in their head about a certain process and they're sort of a single point of failure within the organization. Now, from a business perspective and a leadership perspective, you think one way to mitigate that risk is to put in automation and tools that reduce our dependency on that one person. And that probably is the right answer from a business perspective. But if you're that person that's affected, you are going to be highly threatened by that. Now, all of a sudden, instead of me seeing this as a positive because my job is getting easier, I'm starting to see this as a threat, because now the organization isn't going to value me as much potentially, and they're not going to commend me for my heroics and my tribal knowledge and all the things I do despite my crappy technology. Now all of a sudden I'm not as valuable to the organization, and that's a real fear that we're starting to see a lot of. Not only that, but a lot of people grew up in a time in the 80s, especially like myself. You're used to viewing robots and artificial intelligence and technology in general a little apprehensively. It's almost like we don't trust robots and we don't trust AI, and that's a real thing. People might be excited on the surface about what AI can do, but underneath it all, they are going to be more threatened and more disrupted by AI in ways that we've never seen before. Implementing an ERP system and the changes involved with that are nothing compared to what people are about to experience with AI. And if you're implementing both ERP with AI, now all of a sudden you've just magnified exponentially the impact to the organization. You've increased the opportunities and the likelihood of change resistance, and you've created a lot of fear, uncertainty, doubt, and in some cases panic and chaos within organizations that's going to make these implementations very difficult. And this is why change management is so important. This is good news perhaps for change management practitioners and people that value and are good at change management. But for those of you that aren't good at change management, or if you don't like it, you're going to want to get very good at change management, because you're going to need a lot of it, even more than you ever have in the past with past ERP implementations. You're going to need a ton of change management now to be successful. So not only is change management more important than ever, but next I want to share with you a dark secret that the ERP vendors don't want you to know. So here's what ERP software vendors don't want you to know. If you're a software vendor, you work for one, I'd stop watching right now. And if you are about to buy or deploy ERP software, for sure keep watching. And that dirty little secret is that you don't have to upgrade your ERP system to get all these AI capabilities that I'm talking about in this video. You don't have to rip out SAP's ECC and put in S4HANA. You don't have to rip out Microsoft Dynamics and replace it with Microsoft D365 just to get AI capabilities. The vendors will try to convince you to do that. SAP, for example, won't really let you get the full AI capabilities that they've developed unless you've upgraded to S4HANA. But you don't have to upgrade to S4HANA. You can use your legacy systems and still use AI incrementally and get some value immediately And that's the secret they don't want you to know. There are a ton of upstart AI providers that are tech agnostic that will operate with other ERP systems, including old on-premise ERP systems. You don't have to be on the newest, sexiest cloud version of a software to get the value out of AI. You do, however, need to have somewhat up-to-date systems. If you're running off an old mainframe, it's probably going to be a little more difficult to leverage AI in that setting. But if you're on a 10 or 15 or 20-year-old on-premise system that's web-based, you're probably going to be able to leverage AI in some way to get some value out of that. And if you think about it, what the vendors want you to do is they want you to go through this big, long, painful ERP implementation before you ever get the value from AI. And what happens if you have trouble or it takes forever for you to deploy that ERP system, which happens a lot? A lot of projects go over budget, take longer than expected, and then what? Do you just put off the need or the want for AI? I'd say that's not a good idea. And I think that AI on its own, standalone AI solutions are going to deliver a lot more business value and ROI than an ERP system embedded with AI, especially if you've got an ERP system that's not broken. If it's an old legacy system that's been around for 10 or 20 years, may not be perfect, but if it works good enough, and the real value is going to come from putting some AI agents in place and some generative AI tools to arm your team with better tools within their current environment, that's going to give you more immediate value. It's going to cost you less. It's going to be less risk. It's going to be less disruption to your people. So there's a whole host of reasons why you might want to consider, as part of your digital strategy and roadmap, how to get immediate value out of AI without necessarily needing to go through a big, massive ERP overhaul or a big, massive, expensive digital transformation. Now, you may want to do that. If that's your strategy and that's what you're planning to do all along, then by all means do it. But if you're feeling the pressure of wanting to leverage AI and the only way you feel like you can do it is if you spend millions of dollars on a new ERP system, I'd rethink that and challenge that assumption. And again, the software vendor industry in the ERP space, CRM space, supply chain solution space, they're probably going to tell you you need to upgrade to their ERP system to really get the full value of AI, but that's also going to cost you a lot of time, money, and risk as well. So I hope this has provided you some thoughts around how to think about AI in the context of ERP. I encourage you to download two guides that will help you in your decision making here. One is going to be our digital transformation report. It's a report we publish each year, and it covers a number of trends and best practices, independent software reviews, and rankings that will help you through your evaluation and digital strategy planning process. You can download that by scanning the QR code right here or go to the links below. You can also download our guide to AI strategy and implementation. And in this guide, you'll learn about how you can identify opportunities for AI within your organization and how you can embed AI into your overall digital strategy, whether it's part of an ERP implementation or whether it's on its own. You can find that by scanning the QR code or go to the links below. So that was a clip from my YouTube channel where I talk about cutting through the ERP AI hype. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways, Darian?
Yeah, another great video for sure. Just AI in general, I feel like there's so much we could talk about. We could probably talk about every week, but overall, I thought that it was really interesting. But I do have some follow-up questions from it. One specifically is, in the video, you said that the AI conversation in ERP is sort of mixed, is sort of a mixed bag. So is AI actually being used inside ERP systems in 2025, or are vendors just slapping AI labels on old features?
So yeah, it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think most of them are actually embedding real AI tools in their software, but I think in other cases, they're either renaming something that already existed AI, or because it had some sort of AI-ish sort of function like machine learning. It, like an algorithm. Yeah, algorithms have been around forever. That's not necessarily just limited to AI, but if they have an algorithm that runs a production plan, for how to schedule jobs on the shop floor, now they can call it AI-driven, production planning. And when in reality, maybe it was the same as it's always been. But now that you called it AI, it sounds more sophisticated. It sounds more innovative. But having said that, I mean, some vendors are doing a bit of that, but most of them are investing pretty heavily in AI. They've got AI teams, and they legitimately are building AI capabilities for the most part. I just think that in many cases it's overhyped, and it's creating a false perception that you need the ERP vendor to get those AI capabilities when you absolutely don't.
Got it. Yeah, and another thing I like that you said as well was you said that AI, even more than ERP, is going to be disruptive to people and organizations. Can you explain exactly what you meant by that?
Yeah, so there's two layers or two dimensions of that disruption that I think AI will have. One is going to be in a positive light overall, which is disrupting in terms of rethinking how we run our business, how we can be more efficient, more effective, how we can do more with the same amount of people without necessarily having to hire a bunch of labor to continue scaling or growing our company. So that is one disruption on the positive side. But on the negative side, the disruption is very significant for employees. And they may be excited about ChatGPT. They may use AI in their personal lives, and they may even support the business using more AI. But once you start disrupting and creating chaos with what my job is going to look like, that's where there's negative disruption. Now people are confused. They don't understand how their job is going to matter anymore. Is it going to matter anymore? What's my value going to be? What am I going to do with my time if AI is doing part of the job for me? Is AI going to take my job? There's just so many questions that it creates that a lot of companies don't have answers for. And when the leadership doesn't have the right answer, they're not going to be able to calm down the troops. And you need to clarify that. You need to take that time up front to understand, how is Darian's job going to change? What's it going to look like? What's she going to do? What's her value proposition going forward now that we're, maybe automating some of her job or using AI to do some of her job that she would have done in the past? So we have to create that clarity for ourselves so that we can make you feel better, and all the other employees are going to be affected by it. We have to do that, or else it's just that negative disruption will ensure that you never get to the positive disruption that you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like that with this all being so new, that's definitely something that can get underestimated in organizations right now. One last question. One part that probably made a few software vendors squirm when you said companies don't need to upgrade their ERP to get real AI value. I know we've talked about this throughout the podcast, but can you just explain the pitch from vendors that is, you want AI, cool, spend millions on a full upgrade first, but then you're saying no, actually there are lightweight bolt-on AI tools that can sit on top of what you already have. Can you maybe name some and just dive deeper into that?
Yeah, just because it's top of mind, because we talked about it earlier in this episode, but three names that come to mind, or maybe I'll throw in a couple more. Palantir, Snowflake, Databricks, company called Rapid, which is it's spelled RAPPIT. It's sort of a low-code, no-code development platform that's meant to sit on top of other legacy systems. So those are just four examples there of tools that that are lighter. They do a lot of what an ERP system would do, but they don't require all the huge footprint and the chaos and the cost that goes along with a full-blown ERP system. Now, I will say, though, one caveat, I don't know how well I explained it in the video, or I don't recall how well I explained it in the video, but you do have to have good data. If you want to take advantage of AI, and if you've got this old crappy legacy system that has crappy data in it, it's not going to do you any good. You want to spend your time fixing that, upgrading it, whatever you need to do. So there are cases where it does make sense to upgrade your ERP system. Don't get me wrong. It's not like one size fits all. Don't replace your ERP system. But for a lot of you, especially those of you that maybe just went through an ERP implementation 10 years ago, maybe it feels like yesterday, but it's been a few years already. Maybe you're not that far outdated with your tech stack that you could just take advantage of some of these AI driven tools and kick that problem down the road. Some would say that's short-sighted, but I don't think it's short-sighted at all to say we have better use of our resources to invest in something else right now. Maybe we would rather open a factory or open a new retail outlet or whatever it is, or hire more people, strategic hires that we want to make. Maybe that's a better use of your money than investing in an ERP system you may or may not need. So those are the types of questions, those objective questions you have to ask yourself and make sure you've got a clear value case for it.
Yeah, absolutely. But what a great episode today. Audience, make sure you look in the description below if you want to check out the AI strategy guide and digital transformation report at Third Stage Consulting. Those would be great resources from today's episode for sure.
Yeah, really good resources there. And check that in the show notes or the description field below. And thank you for being here today, Darian. Thank you to the audience for the great questions. Thanks to Khalid for being here today. And look forward to seeing you next week on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. You can find new episodes and past episodes there. So be sure to check that out. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week. In the meantime, take care and have a great week. We'll see you soon.